On December 17, 2025, the White House announced a sweeping new measure, a total blockade on certain oil tankers linked to Venezuela. President Donald Trump declared that U.S. naval forces would intercept vessels under U.S. sanctions, either heading to Venezuela to load oil or leaving its ports with crude. This marks a dramatic escalation, moving from financial penalties to direct physical interdiction at sea. The timing, just before year's end, signals a push for maximum pressure on Caracas. The U.S. is now using its naval power to enforce foreign policy in the Western Hemisphere. This is the most forceful step yet in the Trump administration's campaign against the Maduro government. Unlike previous sanctions, this is a physical barrier, an active enforcement measure, not a symbolic gesture. U.S. naval forces are now authorized to intercept and prevent the movement of these sanctioned tankers, fundamentally changing the risk for anyone trading Venezuelan oil. For Caracas, it's a direct threat to its main source of revenue. For shippers, it's a stark choice: defy the U.S. or abandon Venezuela. The oil industry is already reacting, with analysts scrambling to assess the impact on global supply and prices. This is more than a policy shift. It's a major geopolitical event that could reshape the energy landscape and U.S. influence in the region. At the center of this standoff are two presidents, Donald Trump and Nicolas Maduro. Trump's administration has never recognized Maduro as Venezuela's legitimate leader, instead backing opposition leader Juan Guaidó. The blockade is Trump's boldest move yet, aiming to cut off Maduro's financial lifeline. Maduro, in power since 2013, faces accusations of repression and economic mismanagement, but retains support from the military and key allies. He frames U.S. actions as imperialist aggression, rallying supporters with calls for sovereignty and resistance. The U.S. has targeted Maduro's inner circle and state oil company PDVSA with sanctions, seeking to isolate his regime. This blockade is a direct extension of that strategy, designed to choke off the resources keeping Maduro in power. The clash between these leaders and their ideologies is driving the escalating crisis. The term blockade conjures images of warships, but here it's a targeted move. U.S. naval forces will intercept only those tankers already sanctioned for trading Venezuelan oil. This is a shift from financial and legal pressure to direct physical intervention on the high seas. Interceptions could mean hailing, rerouting, or even boarding ships to enforce the directive. The message to the global shipping industry is clear. Transporting Venezuelan oil now risks direct confrontation with the U.S. Navy. The blockade applies only to vessels on the U.S. sanctions list, aiming to justify the action as enforcement of existing law. Still, the legality will be hotly debated in international forums. For tanker captains and shipping companies, the risk of being stopped, delayed, or penalized is now immediate and severe. The goal makes Venezuelan oil transport so risky, it becomes economically unviable. This is a powerful use of naval dominance to choke off Maduro's main source of hard currency. The world is watching how far the U.S. will go to enforce this new reality. The blockade's first victims are the oil tankers in the Caribbean. Over 30 vessels now face a stark dilemma. Some are en route to Venezuela, others are loaded and outbound, while a few sit idle, awaiting orders in a suddenly hostile environment. Crews and owners must choose: defy the blockade and risk confrontation, or comply and face lawsuits and financial losses. The blockade forces shipping companies to pick a side in a geopolitical conflict. Rerouting, legal battles, and lost contracts will disrupt global oil shipping. The U.S. hopes this deterrent effect will scare off future participants in the Venezuelan oil trade. The message: enter this trade at your own peril. The blockade creates a no-go zone for sanctioned tankers, upending established shipping lanes. The impact extends beyond the 30 ships. It's a warning to the entire maritime industry. This is the chilling effect the U.S. wants to achieve. U.S. sanctions are a key foreign policy tool, economic penalties designed to pressure governments without military force. Sanctions can freeze assets, ban business, and isolate targets from the U.S. financial system. In Venezuela's case, sanctions intensified under Trump, targeting hundreds of officials and, crucially, the state oil company PDVSA. By sanctioning PDVSA, the U.S. aimed to cripple Venezuela's main economic engine. These sanctions have global reach. Even non-US companies risk secondary sanctions if they do business with Venezuela. Most companies avoid the risk, preferring access to the US market over Venezuelan oil. The blockade is a direct extension of this policy, targeting tankers operated by already sanctioned companies. The US now moves from blacklisting on paper to physically stopping ships at sea. It's a dramatic escalation, reflecting frustration that previous sanctions haven't forced political change. The blockade is meant to close loopholes and enforce the sanctions regime with real consequences. The message: sanctions are no longer just financial. They're now enforced by force. The stakes for violating US policy have never been higher. The blockade's goal is clear: cut off Maduro's last financial lifeline and force a political reckoning in Caracas. Oil revenue funds the military, patronage networks, and minimal social services, key pillars of Maduro's power. By severing this income, the US hopes to fracture the regime's support and trigger a leadership change. The strategy is risky. It could backfire, uniting the regime or worsening Venezuela's humanitarian crisis. The administration believes the risk is worth it for a long-term solution. Critics warn of the immediate human cost, further shortages and suffering for ordinary Venezuelans. The blockade is a political tool, not just an economic one, aimed at shifting Venezuela's internal power dynamics. Its success or failure will hinge on whether it topples the regime or deepens the crisis. Oil is Venezuela's lifeblood, accounting for over 95% of export earnings and funding nearly all government functions. PDVSA, once a global energy giant, has been crippled by mismanagement and sanctions, but oil exports remain Maduro's main source of foreign currency. US sanctions have already forced Venezuela to sell oil at steep discounts to a shrinking pool of buyers. The new blockade aims to sever this last economic lifeline by physically stopping tankers from loading or delivering oil. If no ships can move the oil, no sales can be made, starving the regime of cash. This is why the blockade is seen as a critical escalation. It targets the foundation of Venezuela's finances, turning an economic problem into a potential existential crisis for Maduro. The stakes for Venezuela's future have never been higher. For Washington, the blockade is the next step in a years-long campaign to oust Maduro. The US cites the humanitarian crisis, regional instability, and the influence of rivals like Russia, China, and Iran as reasons for action. The blockade sends a message to these powers. The US will defend its interests in the hemisphere. The administration frames the move as a stand for democracy and human rights, supporting the Venezuelan people's desire for change. The timing reflects impatience with the limits of sanctions. Maduro has proven more resilient than expected. With the political and economic landscape set, the US sees this as a decisive push to tip the scales. The blockade is a high-impact, high-risk maneuver to force a post-Maduro transition. The world is watching to see if this gamble pays off. The blockade's impact goes far beyond Venezuela and the US. It shakes global oil markets and international politics. Even a small drop in Venezuelan oil could push prices higher, with traders and producers worldwide watching closely. The use of a naval blockade to enforce sanctions is controversial and will be challenged in international law. Russia and China are likely to condemn the move, escalating tensions in forums like the UN Security Council. For Latin America, the blockade is a test. Some allies may support it, others fear the precedent of US intervention. The history of US actions in the region makes this a sensitive issue. The world is watching. Will the blockade force change in Venezuela, or deepen the crisis? The outcome will shape US foreign policy, international trade rules, and the balance of power in the Western Hemisphere. The Caribbean is now the stage for a major global power struggle. The ripples from this blockade will be felt far and wide.